On a breezy Saturday morning, sunlight filtered through the oaks lining Juniper Lane. The children emerged with their chalk sets, planning to spend an hour or two transforming the sidewalk into a colorful tapestry. Among them were siblings Rachel, age 7, and Trevor, age 9, along with their friend Sonia, also 9. They laughed and joked, scribbling hearts and rainbows along the curb. A couple of parents gathered on the front lawns, chatting about weekend plans. One mother, Nadia Shelton, took a sip of coffee from her thermos, enjoying the sight of her kids engaged in carefree fun. She waved to her friend Linda, who was watering potted plants next door. "Isn't it cute?" Nadia asked. "They're going to draw an entire mural if we let them." Linda smiled. "Better chalk dust than video games all day," she replied, turning off the hose. "At least they're outside." Just then, a door creaked open down the street. A figure stepped out, Marion Claymore. The crisp lines of her beige slacks and neatly buttoned blouse were as stiff as her posture. She clutched a thin file folder and a pair of sunglasses. Glancing around, she seemed to set her sights on the group of children scribbling on the sidewalk. Marion's lips tightened into a faint sneer. A wave of subtle tension passed through the parents. There she is, they thought. Karen. She marched up to the chalk zone. Rachel was bent over, adding curly locks to a stick figure she called Princess Flower. Trevor was drawing a rocket ship. Sonia was scrawling her name in big letters, complete with decorative butterflies around it. Marion cleared her throat loudly. "Good morning," she said, her tone dripping with disapproval. The children glanced up, startled by the sudden voice. Marion folded her arms, surveying the array of chalk lines. "I see we've redecorated the sidewalk again." Nadia stepped forward, determined to keep things civil. "Yes, the kids enjoy their chalk art," she said with a polite smile. "They aren't damaging anything, Marion. A little rain and it's gone." Marion pursed her lips. "Rain? We're in a drought this season, Nadia. Water is scarce. The stains linger. It's unsightly, and it borders on vandalism. We have rules in this neighborhood." Linda interjected. "The HOA guidelines say nothing about children's chalk drawings." Marion's eyes flashed. "That's because our guidelines haven't been updated to include every modern nuisance. But I assure you, I will be bringing this up at the next board meeting." She turned on her heel and stalked away, leaving behind a simmering tension. The children exchanged anxious glances. Nadia sighed, and Linda shrugged in exasperation. They all knew Marion's pattern. She'd squawk about her grievances, threaten to bring them to the HOA, and typically be outvoted or ignored. The children soon went back to their drawing, though the fun felt slightly dampened. No one suspected Marion had a more cunning plan brewing, a plan that would go far beyond a mere complaint or an email campaign. A few days later, on a Monday afternoon, the kids returned from school. They scattered to their usual activities. For those on Juniper Lane, that often included a ritual of chalk art on the sidewalk before dinner. Trevor and Rachel hopped off the school bus, dropped their backpacks at home, and dashed outside with fresh sticks of chalk. Their mother, Nadia, was inside the house starting dinner, occasionally peeking out the window to keep an eye on them. Sonia joined them a moment later, a rainbow-hued assortment of chalk in her arms. "I want to draw a giant castle," she announced, excitement lighting up her eyes. Trevor nodded. "I'm making a race car this time." They approached their favorite portion of the sidewalk. However, as they stepped closer, an odd sight stopped them in their tracks. Rectangular trays, shallow and plastic, scattered across the pavement. On each tray was a thick layer of something that looked suspiciously sticky. In the center of each tray lay what appeared to be pieces of dry dog kibble or some kind of bait. "What's that?" Rachel asked, her eyes going wide. She inched closer, wrinkling her nose. Sonia squatted down for a better look, but recoiled when she realized the trays were designed to trap living creatures. "Gross. They look like glue traps. For rats or mice, I think." Trevor frowned, stepping sideways to inspect the array. The traps were placed strategically, right where they usually drew with chalk. In fact, the entire area was dotted with them, spaced about a foot or two apart, forming a patchy minefield of sticky surfaces. On a few of them, someone had scribbled, "Pest control, keep away," in black marker. "Why would these be here?" Rachel asked. She was only 7, but she already sensed something was wrong. Sonia frowned. Could it be that somebody's trying to get rid of rodents? Trevor's eyes flicked up and down the street. Not likely. We've never had a rat problem here. At least, no one told us. Nadia emerged from the house, noticing the children had stopped. What's the matter, kids? Mom, look, Trevor pointed. Someone put out a bunch of sticky rat traps where we usually draw. Nadia's expression darkened with concern. She strode over and prodded one of the trays with the tip of her shoe, careful not to get stuck herself. This is dangerous, she muttered. Kids could step in these, or pets could wander over and get stuck. Who on earth would? She didn't need to finish the sentence. A single name floated unspoken in the air. Nadia's lips thinned. Marion Claymore. The abruptness and the placement of these traps reeked of a sabotage tactic. Nadia was livid, but she also recognized the need to handle it through proper channels. She pulled her phone from her pocket, snapped a few photos of the traps, and texted them to Linda next door. Linda's reply came almost instantly. OMG. Removing them now. This is insane. Word spread among neighbors up and down Juniper Lane. Within minutes, a small group had congregated around the sticky trap zone, carefully lifting each tray off the pavement with rubber gloves or thick plastic bags. One man, David, carried a large garbage bag to collect the traps. The children stood off to the side, clutching their chalk, confusion written on their faces. This is definitely new, David said grimly. I walk my dog here every morning. These traps weren't here yesterday. Linda huffed. I can guess who did this. Nadia crossed her arms. We'll need to confront her. She can't be placing these hazardous things where children play. A murmur of agreement rose from the others. Greenfield Garden Estates had seen petty disputes before, trash cans left out too long, or shrubs that blocked scenic views, but deliberately setting out sticky traps on a sidewalk frequented by children felt like a new low. Many worried about pets, or even wildlife like small birds getting stuck. The cruelty and potential harm extended well beyond the chalk-drawing kids. They decided to remove every trap, documenting each one with photos. Once done, they sanitized the sidewalk with soapy water, cleaning up the residue. The children looked on quietly, their chalk day ruined. But as evening fell, the collective mood shifted from shock to determination. She's crossed a line, Nadia said flatly. We have to do something. Let's call an emergency HOA meeting if we have to. And so the seeds of confrontation were sown. Tuesday morning dawned gray and chilly. At precisely 8 a.m., Nadia and Linda took their children to the bus stop, then marched 2 blocks to Marion Claymore's house. The property was immaculate, hedges trimmed with military precision, a perfectly symmetrical flower bed lined with pebbles, and a driveway devoid of any stray leaves. The woman's obsession with neatness and control was evident in every inch of the property. Nadia pressed the doorbell. They waited, hearts thumping with irritation. After a few moments, the door opened a crack, revealing Marion's pinched features. She wore a crisp navy blazer, even this early in the morning. Her gaze traveled from Nadia to Linda and back again, betraying no surprise at their arrival. We need to talk, Nadia said, holding up her phone. Do you know anything about these? She swiped to a photo of one of the rat traps. Marion's eyes flicked over the image. She pursed her lips. I'm aware that there have been pest issues in certain areas of the neighborhood. Linda stepped forward. We removed over a dozen of these from the sidewalk, where the kids usually draw. You do realize how dangerous that is, don't you? Marion kept her composure, though a tightening around her eyes suggested annoyance. It's unfortunate if children or anyone else came across them. But these traps are an effective means of controlling rodents. Nadia's cheeks reddened. Rodents that you claim are conveniently located exactly where kids draw with chalk. Marion let out a small huff of breath. I've witnessed rats or mice scurrying around that area late at night. If your children's chalk art is attracting them, maybe from crumbs of snacks or bits of food they drop, then it's a public health issue. I'm only doing what's best for the community. Linda stared at Marion, mouth agape. Are you suggesting that the kids are feeding rats by drawing with chalk? That's absurd. Marion tilted her chin, eyes narrowing. You might call it absurd. I call it community responsibility. If the sidewalk has become a magnet for vermin, it needs to be addressed. If some children are inconvenienced, well, that's a small price to pay for hygiene and property value protection. Nadia stepped forward, jabbing a finger toward Marion. This is beyond a minor inconvenience. A child could step in those traps and get stuck, not to mention birds or pets. You could be looking at animal cruelty charges if a cat wandered onto that glue. Marian sighed, feigning patience. I'm sure anyone supervising their pets or children properly could avoid them. Besides, I left a warning label. Pest control, keep away. Linda clenched her fists, struggling to maintain composure. You had no right to place those traps on public property. The sidewalk belongs to the city, and we all have access to it. Marian's lips curved into a frosty smile. I think you'll find there are certain easements in this neighborhood that fall under HOA purview. But by all means, take it up at the next board meeting if you disagree. I would be happy to present the evidence of rodent infestation that we should all be concerned about. Nadia stifled a growl of frustration. Oh, we will. Believe me, we will. And if you think you can get away with endangering kids and animals, you're in for a rude awakening. With that, Nadia and Linda turned on their heels, storming off Marian's porch. The door shut with a click behind them. Anger simmered in their veins. They could practically hear Marian's smug satisfaction through the door. But the battle was only beginning. They had evidence, witnesses, and a strong suspicion that Marian's real motive wasn't about rodent control at all. It was about driving the children away from coloring the sidewalk. Greenfield Garden Estates had seen various HOA dramas over the years, but the sticky trap incident galvanized people like never before. Parents were outraged. Pet owners were horrified. Even neighbors without children or animals felt the moral weight of the situation. It wasn't just about a convenience or an aesthetic preference. It was about safety and the well-being of the community. A few families organized an impromptu gathering on Wednesday evening in Linda's garage, turning it into a sort of makeshift war room. People brought folding chairs and notepads, laptops were opened, and a large poster board was pinned on the wall, labeled Goal, Restore Chalk Zone, and Stop Marian's Overreach. Nadia stood at the front, clearing her throat to address the group. Thank you all for coming. I know this is short notice, but we need to figure out how to handle Marian's latest stunt, one that easily could have harmed our kids and pets. A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled neighbors, mothers, fathers, single homeowners, and even an elderly couple, Bob and Denise, who had lived there long before Marian showed up. We've got a couple of key points to address, Nadia continued. First, we need to formally complain to the HOA board about Marian placing traps on public walkways. Second, we should find a way to ensure our kids can keep drawing without fear of sabotage. And third, we need to be prepared for any argument Marian throws at us, like this rat infestation nonsense. A mother named Tricia raised her hand. Have we looked into local ordinances? Isn't it illegal to put traps on sidewalks without a city permit? A father named Edward nodded. I checked. In many municipalities, you can't place traps, especially glue traps, in common public spaces without explicit permission. It's considered a hazard, not just for animals, but for humans, too. Linda jotted notes on a legal pad. So we have the law on our side. That's good. But Marian is resourceful. She'll spin any detail to her favor. Nadia pointed to Linda's notepad. We'll gather testimonies. Everyone who removed a trap, everyone who saw them or took pictures, and especially parents who feel threatened. We'll present a unified case at the next HOA meeting. A wave of nods filled the room. People leaned forward, energized. For too long, Marian had dominated the HOA with her threats and pseudo-legal intimidations. Now the community was fighting back as one. I also have an idea, Nadia said, her eyes sparkling with determination. What if we create an official chalk zone, like we request a formal space, sanctioned by the HOA, where kids are allowed to draw? We can label it properly, so there's no argument that it's vandalism. And we can even do it so it's designed in a neat, contained manner. A hum of excitement spread through the group. Bob, the elderly neighbor, gave a half-smile. I love seeing the kids drawing. Reminds me of my grandkids. I'd happily sign any petition in favor. Linda added, we can even have a sign that says chalk-friendly area or something like that. If it's officially recognized, Marian can't accuse kids of defacement. Tricia lifted her phone. I'll make a quick group chat for everyone here, so we can coordinate. The next HOA meeting is scheduled for next Tuesday, right? Yes, Nadia confirmed. We have about a week to gather everything. Let's do it. With renewed resolve, the group dispersed into the cool night. The plan was clear. They would collectively challenge Marian on her misuse of traps, prove she acted without authority, and propose a constructive solution that would preserve the children's right to play. in a manner that even the HOA board would find legitimate. It was an ambitious plan, but the sense of unity felt stronger than the anxiety that often accompanied the words Karen Claymore. In the days leading up to the HOA meeting, Greenfield Garden Estates buzzed with activity. Parents exchanged emails, coordinating statements and photos. Pet owners recounted tales of near misses, where their cats or dogs had almost wandered onto the sticky traps. Even child-free residents stepped forward, citing concerns over the cruelty of such devices in a public space. Linda took on the task of collecting written testimonies. She received an outpouring of stories, each more upsetting than the last. One neighbor found a small bird stuck in a trap near the bushes, likely placed there by Marion. They managed to free it, but the poor creature lost feathers. Another spotted Marion lurking near the sidewalk at dusk, though she fled when confronted. Many reported the emotional distress of their children, who asked if that mean lady is going to put more yucky traps. Nadia compiled a slideshow of photos showing the traps' placement and how close they were to the children's chalk drawings. She highlighted the bright, colorful scribbles next to these grim, sticky trays that could ensnare any living thing that chanced upon them. Meanwhile, Edward, who had some legal background, volunteered to call the city's public works department. He inquired about local codes regarding pest control in public areas. His conversation confirmed that without specific permits or a city directive, placing glue traps in communal walkways was indeed a violation. The official on the phone sounded appalled, promising to look into it further if the HOA didn't resolve it. The highlight of their preparation, however, was the official request for a chalk-friendly zone. Nadia and Linda drafted a neat proposal, complete with diagrams for how to paint squares or hopscotch outlines on a specific section of the sidewalk. They proposed certain guidelines, like parents cleaning up residual chalk after big drawing sessions, ensuring no large debris or food was left behind, and offered a small budget allocation for signposting. The plan was designed to preempt any of Marion's usual complaints. Everyone who saw the draft agreed it was a clever compromise. Children's creativity was preserved, but the HOA could impose some measure of structure. By the weekend before the meeting, the momentum felt unstoppable. Marion, for her part, made no public statements. She did not respond to the group's queries or text messages, nor did she offer any explanation. A few times, neighbors spotted her peering from behind her curtains. She seemed to sense a brewing storm but was silent, like a general retreating behind castle walls before a siege. Yet no one doubted she was preparing her own countermove. It was in her nature to come armed with obscure citations and suspicious photographs that twisted facts to her advantage. Tuesday evening finally arrived, and with it, the much-anticipated HOA meeting. The gathering was held in the Greenfield Community Hall, a modest space with rows of folding chairs and a small stage at the front where the board members typically sat behind a long table. That evening, attendance soared well above average. Residents who rarely bothered to come out for these monthly sessions showed up in droves, galvanized by the rat trap scandal. Parents ushered in kids, some of whom brought small containers of chalk as a symbolic gesture. Others wore T-shirts with slogans like, "We support chalk art," or "Kids before traps." At the front of the room sat the 5-member HOA board, Joseph Walters, the president, Diane Shun, secretary, and 3 other longtime members. Marion Claymore, as a board member, was conspicuously present, wearing a pristine cream-colored blazer. She looked calm but tense, jaw set. The nameplate before her read M. Claymore, but many in the audience whispered Karen whenever they glanced her way. A hush fell when Joseph Walters tapped the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," he said, scanning the crowd. "Welcome to our monthly HOA meeting. It appears we have a larger turnout than usual, which I take to mean there's an important issue on everyone's minds. Let's proceed with the agenda." After a few housekeeping items, budget updates, and landscaping notes, Joseph cleared his throat. "Now, we have a new business item related to public safety and children's activities. Several residents have requested the floor to discuss certain, sticky traps found on the sidewalks. Let's open the discussion." Nadia rose from the second row, laptop clutched in her arms, voice carefully measured. "Thank you, Mr. Walters. My name is Nadia Shelton, and I speak on behalf of many families and residents on Juniper Lane. We have reason to believe that Ms. Claymore placed multiple glue traps on the sidewalks where children play. I have photos, testimonies, and references to local laws that deem such action illegal without proper permits. She pressed a button, and a projector screen, set up beside the stage, lit up with images of the traps, their placement near chalk drawings, and then a final shot of the group removing them with gloves. A ripple of concern and outrage traveled through the audience. Eyes flicked to Marion, who sat with her lips tight, arms folded. Nadia continued. As you can see, these were placed directly where our kids draw with chalk. The risk is obvious. A child could easily step in one, pets could be harmed, and wildlife has already been caught. She clicked to a photo of a bird with sticky residue on its feathers. Furthermore, we have city ordinance references that require municipal approval for deploying traps in public walkways. We'd like Ms. Claymore to address these concerns. A murmur of agreement rose from the crowd. All eyes turned to Marion. She slowly stood, clearing her throat. Her posture was rigid, but she wore a mask of cool composure. "Good evening," she said evenly. "While I acknowledge that some neighbors removed glue traps from the sidewalk, the insinuation that I placed them with malicious intent is misguided." She cast a sharp glance at Nadia. "Yes, I deployed a few traps, but purely for pest control reasons. A neighbor on Maple Street informed me of sightings of large rats. When I personally observed rodent droppings near those chalk drawings, I decided to act swiftly to protect our community from infestations that could threaten our health and property values." She paused, letting her words settle. "It is unfortunate that some took issue with my methods, but I would argue that children's sidewalk graffiti, while seemingly harmless, may attract vermin if they bring snacks, or if the chalk residue influences the rodent's behavior. I was proactive, perhaps overly so, but only in service to the greater good." A wave of muttering spread through the audience. Many shook their heads in disbelief. One father called out, "That's ridiculous." Another mother muttered, "She's lying about rat droppings." Marion raised her hand for silence. "I have photographs of rodent droppings, which I believe correlate with the area in question." She produced a folder and handed it to the board members. "As for permission, I was under the impression we had the authority, as an HOA, to enact immediate pest control measures if necessary." Joseph Walters, the HOA president, glanced at Diane Chun. They flipped through the photos, frowns deepening. "Ms. Claymore, the board typically approves pest control measures in common areas, but that typically entails hiring professionals, not placing glue traps on a public sidewalk that is partially under city jurisdiction." Diane chimed in. "And it usually requires signage and advanced notice to residents. Sticky traps are widely considered inhumane and are discouraged unless absolutely necessary. This is definitely not protocol." Marion's composure tightened. "I understand that in hindsight, but sometimes action must be taken swiftly to prevent a larger infestation. Surely you can understand that, Mr. Walters. If a rodent problem spread, we'd be responsible for a bigger expense." Before Joseph could respond, Nadia spoke up again, her voice calm but resolute. "Ms. Claymore, your claim hinges on the idea that children's chalk drawings led to a rat infestation. That's simply not backed by any real evidence. We have statements from multiple neighbors who have never seen a rodent in that area. Moreover, the pictures of droppings you provided could have come from anywhere, if they're even real." She gestured to the screen again. "Meanwhile, we have documented proof that these traps were placed precisely where kids draw." A ripple of applause burst from a section of the audience. Marion's nostrils flared. Nadia closed her laptop, then handed out a printed proposal to the board. "And here's our second point. We've drafted a plan to designate a small section of the sidewalk on Juniper Lane as a chalk-friendly zone. We'll mark it clearly, so it's not considered vandalism or random defacement. The children can draw, and parents will ensure cleanup. This is a positive solution to any concerns about the appearance of the neighborhood. Plus, we'll abide by any guidelines the HOA sets." Linda chimed in. "Yes, a safe, designated area. That way, the kids can express themselves, we maintain a tidy environment, and no one can argue it's lowering property values. We're asking for official HOA support." Joseph Walters studied the document, glancing at the board members. Some nodded in approval. The crowd murmured in excitement. It was a neat compromise, addressing nearly every complaint Marion had raised in the past. Diane smiled slightly, meeting Nadia's gaze. This is quite thorough. You even included a small budget estimate for signage and paint. Marian's jaw tensed. She looked as though she might object, but clearly recognized the wave of support behind this proposal. To argue against it would paint her as someone who simply hated children's chalk drawings for no reason. Her mention of rodents was quickly losing credibility among the crowd. One of the other board members turned to Marian. Ms. Claymore, do you have an objection to a designated chalk zone? Seems like it would alleviate your concerns about random scribbles all over the place. Marian's lips parted, but for once, no immediate retort sprang to mind. She flicked her eyes around the room, seeing the unified front of neighbors. She exhaled slowly, forcing a tight smile. I suppose it could be an acceptable compromise, if enforced properly. I only want to ensure the neighborhood remains clean and attractive. Joseph Walters nodded. Noted. Given the large support for this measure, I suggest we put the official chalk-friendly zone to a vote. He glanced at the board members. All in favor of approving the zone, please raise your hands. All but Marian's hand went up. 4-1. The motion carried. Applause and cheers erupted in the hall. Children high-fived each other, parents grinned, and a few folks turned to glare pointedly at Marian, who sat stiffly, arms crossed. After the excitement subsided, Joseph tapped the microphone again. As for the second matter, Ms. Claymore's unilateral decision to place glue traps on public walkways, the board will issue a formal reprimand. We ask that Ms. Claymore refrain from any such actions in the future without board approval. Additionally, we'll consult with legal counsel regarding potential liabilities. Any further unauthorized placement of traps or hazardous materials in common areas could result in fines or removal from the board. A hush fell, and all eyes turned to Marian. She pressed her lips into a thin line, but did not protest. This was an official rebuke, rare in HOA circles, but not unheard of. The threat of removal from the board was implied if she kept overstepping. With that, the final matter was settled. Residents left the meeting in high spirits, chattering about the success of the Chalk Zone initiative. For the first time in a long while, many felt that the community had stood up to Marian Claymore and won. A burst of creative energy swept through Greenfield Garden Estates in the following week. Nadia, Linda, and a handful of other parents spearheaded the transformation of the sidewalk on Juniper Lane into a vibrant, officially sanctioned chalk area. The HOA provided a modest budget for materials, thanks to the board's vote. Volunteers bought weather-resistant paint, stencils, and a sturdy sign that read, Chalk-Friendly Area. Brought to you by the Greenfield Garden Estates HOA. Be creative, be respectful, be safe. Early on a Saturday morning, a group of neighbors gathered. Children toddled behind, curious about the big project. Under a bright summer sun, they taped off a rectangular section of the sidewalk to paint wide squares. They used stencils to add whimsical borders, a row of cartoon flowers, a line of stars, and a playful, "Welcome to our chalk zone" message across the top. Parents took turns rolling paint, while the kids helped with smaller brushes under close supervision. The atmosphere brimmed with laughter, shared jokes, and the occasional squeal from a child who got paint on their shoes. Even passers-by slowed down to admire the work. A few non-parents pitched in too, seniors, young professionals, couples without kids, because it felt like more than just a children's project. It was a statement of community solidarity. Nadia spotted Marian a few houses down at one point, watching from her driveway. Marian made no move to approach. She merely stood with folded arms, her eyes hidden behind sunglasses. Nadia wondered what Marian was thinking. Perhaps she was stewing, or maybe, just maybe, she felt a pang of regret or isolation. Nadia couldn't be sure. By midday, the paint had dried. The sign was planted, and the official chalk zone was ready for its inaugural session. Linda handed out fresh packs of chalk to the kids, who buzzed with excitement. Soon, the squares filled with colorful doodles, stick figures, animals, flower gardens, spaceships, and bright letters spelling out the children's names. A father started drawing a giant hopscotch grid. A mother added swirl designs to the corners. Even a teenage neighbor, who had an artistic flair, contributed a stunning mandala design in bright hues. The sense of communal pride was palpable, and unspoken, "We did this together." Over the subsequent weeks, the chalk zone became a cherished feature of Juniper Lane. Children gathered almost daily, especially after school, to decorate and redecorate the pavement. The painted squares served as a neat boundary, keeping the chalk art contained and pleasing to the eye. Parents were happy with the arrangement, and there was no further talk of graffiti or defacement. Marion Claymore's presence, however, loomed in the background. She had not attempted another sabotage. The board's stern warning, plus the threat of legal repercussions, seemed to have curbed her more extreme impulses. On a few mornings, neighbors spotted her circling the area, seemingly checking for any sign of infestation. But no traps appeared again. Occasionally, Marion would bring up her rodent concerns at smaller HOA subcommittee gatherings, pressing for professional pest control. Yet the board insisted on a thorough inspection by licensed experts, who found minimal evidence of rodents beyond the usual suburban wildlife. Marion tried to push the narrative that the chalk zone could still be a magnet for pests, but without solid proof, no one bought into her alarmist claims. Meanwhile, the children's creations flourished. The older kids even organized chalk contests, inviting neighbors to vote on the best drawing of the week. They selected themes like Under the Sea or Outer Space Adventure, and turned the sidewalk into a mini art gallery. Parents loved the creativity. Younger children gained confidence, seeing their doodles admired by passers-by. One afternoon, Marion quietly ventured down the street, drifting near the chalk zone while a few parents and kids were drawing. She hovered at the edge, arms crossed, observing. Trevor noticed her first. He tensed, but she made no move to speak or disrupt. Nadia, sensing his discomfort, looked up and gave Marion a measured nod. Marion did not return the nod, but also did not scowl or comment. She simply watched for a minute, then turned and walked away. Some interpreted her silence as begrudging acceptance. Others suspected she was merely biding her time until she found another angle to exploit. But for the moment, tranquility reigned. As the weeks turned into months, the success of the chalk zone had a ripple effect across Greenfield Garden Estates. The shared sense of accomplishment brought neighbors closer. People who once offered only polite waves across the street were now striking up conversations, discussing the children's latest sidewalk masterpieces or brainstorming new ways to enhance community spirit. Parents organized small weekend events in the chalk zone, like a chalk and chill morning, where they provided donuts and juice while kids drew. Sometimes local seniors joined, telling stories from their childhood as they marveled at the kids' creations. High school students, encouraged by the friendly atmosphere, volunteered to help maintain the zone, occasionally retouching the faded paint borders or sweeping away debris. The HOA board, too, became more transparent and receptive to resident proposals. Joseph Walters and Diane Shen listened carefully to suggestions for upgrading other neighborhood amenities, like adding a small bench near the chalk zone or installing better lighting for evening strolls. A portion of the HOA budget was allocated to these improvements, spurred by the positive attention the chalk zone had brought. Meanwhile, Marion Claymore became less vocal. She still held her seat on the board, at least for the remainder of her term, but her influence waned. She seemed outnumbered by a newly energized community that saw through her aggressive tactics. Whenever she tried to nitpick someone's lawn or holiday decorations, she found fewer supporters willing to rally behind her. People remembered the rat traps and how quickly she'd used them to intimidate children. The moral high ground was no longer hers to claim. Strangely, some neighbors felt a pang of pity for Marion. What did she gain from stirring up so much drama? Perhaps she genuinely believed she was protecting property values or upholding standards, but her heavy-handed approach had alienated almost everyone. In quieter moments, Nadia wondered if Marion might have welcomed the chance to integrate, if only she'd let go of her need for absolute control. Yet overall, the dark cloud that once loomed over the children's fun had dissipated. Greenfield Garden Estates was, at last, living up to its name. A flourishing community, green and vibrant, where gardens were free to bloom and children's art brightened the sidewalks. It was nearly the end of summer when the neighborhood decided to hold a small chalk festival. Nadia proposed the idea, and the HOA approved it unanimously, Marion abstaining from the vote but not actively opposing it. The festival would feature a competition for the best chalk drawing, a bake sale, and a mini fundraiser for local animal shelters, a subtle jab at the sticky trap fiasco, though no one said it aloud. On the day of the festival, tents popped up along Juniper Lane. Tables displayed homemade cookies, muffins, and lemonade. The official chalk zone gleamed with new coats of paint around the borders. Children of all ages, and even some daring adults, took to the sidewalk with boxes of chalk in hand. They drew sweeping murals of cityscapes, gardens bursting with flowers, whimsical creatures, and tributes to famous artworks. Parents smiled, cameras flashed, and the sweet aroma of baked goods filled the air. A gentle breeze carried laughter throughout the street. Bob, the elderly neighbor, served as one of the judges for the chalk competition, relishing his role as he walked along with a notepad and a grin. When the winners were announced, they included a tie between a meticulously detailed undersea scene and a sprawling outer space extravaganza. Both sets of artists received small trophies and loud applause. But in truth, every participant felt victorious. The festival wasn't about beating others. It was about celebrating creativity and community. Marion Claymore did appear, briefly. She lingered at the periphery, wearing a tight-lipped expression. She glanced at the chalk drawings, the cheerful crowd, and the sign that proclaimed chalk-friendly area. Perhaps she realized that her attempts to stamp out the children's sidewalk art had only made it stronger, more beloved. She turned away, arms folded, and disappeared back down the street. No one chased after her. The festival continued, joy unbroken. By sunset, the children were glowing with pride, covered in smears of chalk dust, while the parents felt a warm satisfaction. In that moment, they saw how adversity, far from destroying a community, could bring it closer together. Marion's meddling had initially sparked frustration and fear, but the neighborhood rose above it, forging a solution that not only protected their children's play, but also united them under a common cause. As dusk settled, Nadia and Linda stood by the newly chalked sidewalk, watching the kids clean up for the night. The children insisted on leaving some of the most colorful designs intact for as long as the weather would allow. Even as the chalk would inevitably fade with time or the next rain, it would be reborn through fresh drawings. They'll be talking about this festival for a while, Linda said softly, a smile dancing on her lips. Nadia nodded. I think this is the start of something really positive. We took a bad situation, dangerous traps, and turned it into a reason to come together. From a short distance away, Trevor and Rachel ran up to show their mother the chalk smudges on their hands, giggling at how their palms were dyed pink and green. Nadia laughed, gently wiping them with a wet towel. She gazed around, noticing how neighbors were chatting in clusters, exchanging warm farewells, planning future get-togethers. This was the power of community, a force that could overcome one person's aggression, bridging gaps between people who once barely knew each other. The chalk zone stood as a tangible reminder that, when faced with hostility, unity could prevail, painting the sidewalks in brilliant color rather than letting them become a field of sticky traps. And so ended the saga of the rat traps and the unsightly graffiti. The final outcome? A flourishing children's art zone that stood as a testament to resilience and collaboration. Karen, Marion Claymore, had failed to stamp out the chalk drawings. Instead, she inadvertently made them official, unstoppable, and more vibrant than ever. In the months and years to come, children of Greenfield Garden Estates would grow up remembering the day their sidewalk was recognized as their own creative canvas, and how, together, their community had tamed even the most stubborn Karen in the neighborhood.